Hi, I'm Malcolm Haslett.
And I'm Janice Baker. The man known as the father of the Adelaide Fringe and the godfather of the Adelaide Cabaret Festival joins us.
In this episode of Ad Time, and boy, has he got a story to tell. Stay with us on Ad Time. To be or not to be, that is the question.
Oh, Malcolm.
Whether 'tis nobler in the mind of man. Do you reckon I'd get on?
I think you've been on something.
Is there somebody that might pick me up for a show in the Cabaret
I
Festival?
don't know. Should we ask Frank? Because Frank's...
Possibly.
No, Frank, welcome to our program. I'm sorry for this behaviour.
Frank Ford, you are the godfather and the father of all of these things that have actually changed the shape of entertainment, I guess, in Australia.
Well, the Adelaide Cabaret Festival, for instance, is the biggest and best cabaret in the world. And it's spawned many other cabaret festivals. Brisbane has now copied us, Auckland, Melbourne, and now even in Perth they're trying to do one as well. And of course the Fringe is the second biggest fringe in the world.
Yes.
Yes. We've talked quite a bit about the Fringe on this program, having the different people that are making it happen. But let's go back to the beginning for you. How did you get involved in the entertainment industry? Because you didn't start off to do that, did you?
No, I started off as a history teacher and scholar. And I went to England to do my master's degree in history, and then went off to America, where I started
Just hold
teaching.
there for tick. So going to England, was that like a rite of passage at that time? Because a lot of...
Absolutely,
a lot of people went to England.
Jermaine Greer,
Yes.
all my other friends went at that time. And Australia was very much a second-rate colonial leftover, really.
And this is when? In the
1960.
In the early 60s?
Yeah, 60s, yes. And many artists left at that time. I say we were brought up under the Ming dynasty, which was rather restricted in many ways. And so many of us went to England, and of course our careers took off in all sorts of directions.
So even in those days, would you say that the Australians were well respected and well regarded for their talents?
No, they weren't. No. I remember my first, I was working part-time, and my first job was at St Michael's English School, grammar school, and the headmaster, who was a major, he was the headmaster, some major, someone or other, and he said, oh, he said, you know, you Australians have a great advantage. You say, we can't put you colonials in your class by your accent.
Oh.
That was the attitude to the Australians. We were colonials.
When you look back, though, in the greater scheme of history, it's amazing that in such a short time this country has embraced what it's got.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Do you think the cultural fringe is still, or no, cringe, sorry, not fringe, cultural cringe is still
Fringe
there?
is very rich.
Yes.
Exactly, they're coming to us now, we don't have to go to them anymore. But do you think there's still a cultural cringe in this country?
I don't think so. I think, you know, the last 20, 30 years has been phenomenal.
We've
look at
got-
our films, our actors, you know, the best ones in Hollywood, of course, aren't they, these days?
Well, that's true. So we just stopped when you were going to America.
Yes, I went to America again. I got a scholarship to Columbia University. I've been directing at various places in South America.
These are plays you're talking about?
Yes, I was working for the British Council in South America.
But what moved you into direction of actors?
So from history
Yes.
to acting, directing.
See, I was right with my lead. To be or not to be.
If it's cabaret, you've got to sing and dance at the same time,
I
Malcolm.
don't think I couldn't do that, Frank.
As he's sitting down.
No, but what moved you across from being an academic? in that
Well,
way?
it's interesting. I went to live in Lebanon. I was working at the American University there, and they asked me to direct a play. And I directed. It was a great success. And so I started then going to summer courses and courses in London between my university vacations. And then after that, I won a scholarship to Columbia University, right in the heart of New York.
How wonderful.
And we had the most wonderful professors. And I started directing off-Broadway, off-Broadway.
Right, so that was the connection.
Yes.
What happened next for you? Did you come back home?
Luckily, I came back home because I'd hate to be living in America now.
Oh, yes, exactly.
And so,
Frightening.
yes, but how, what happened when you came home? How, the connections that you had for directing and all the performances, how did that come about?
Here, well, I came back as a lecturer at the Adelaide College of the Arts and Education. And first of all, set up my own company as well as teaching there, because in America I was used to being a professional in education, a lecturer, but to keep your job you had to keep your professional status as directing or acting, whatever it was. And so I was used to that, so I immediately set up my own company, Icon Theatre Company. We did one of the first productions in the Space.
Did you?
A couple of productions there and went on.
That's in the festival centre here.
That's
in
right.
South
Oh,
Australia,
yes.
if you're not
And
familiar.
but then I got involved with the Theatre Guild, the Adelaide Theatre Guild. But my own company took off, and we were doing productions here, and quite successful. But it became just too much lecturing,
Yes.
and of course doing that, and of course also I was organising the Fringe.
Well, that's the old thing, isn't it? Give away the day job and do it for real, isn't it?
Yes.
So we have a poster that's behind you that everyone can see now.
But that's,
And
from 1990,
That's
we've
right.
just worked out.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting how the Fringe has always had that sort of rather avant-garde looking... it's a competition, isn't it, to design the
yes,
Fringe
yes,
posters?
every year, yes.
And so they've been very diverse and always sort of pushing the boundaries in a way in posters. and
That's
art
right.
design.
I mean, that's the Fringe, isn't it?
Well, it
Pushing the
is, yeah.
boundaries, and
Yeah.
it's...
Well, how did that happen for you, though? How did you get involved with the Fringe?
Well, I'd been directing off Broadway, which is virtually the Fringe in New York. And when I came back here, the Fringe had been growing. It started off in 1960 when the Adelaide Festival started.
And why did it start, Frank? Because a lot of people don't actually know that.
Yes. Well, I think it's wonderful. The Adelaide Festival was modelled on the Edinburgh Festival, and it was essentially in the beginning a music festival, very classical music and some classical plays, Shakespeare and all the rest of it. And but some of our local artists said, well, we'd like to be showing our stuff as well in the festival. And so they started doing their things off the festival or the Fringe, on the fringe of the festival.
Yes.
And it kept on growing. When I came back to Australia in '74, already there was about 100 shows in the Fringe, but it wasn't an organisation. And when I came back, I said, we should start an organisation like I had in New York. The off-Broadway theatres got together, because we were doing all sorts of experimental plays, new plays, and all the rest of it. And so it's very hard to get money, because the government doesn't give money. You've got to get, in America, you've got to get it from corporations and foundations, And so they wouldn't give money to these mangy productions that were going on in cafes, in basements, all over the place. But as an organisation, yes, we'll give you money to do new work and new things like that. So when I came back here, Don Dunstan said, well, the Fringes development, we'd like to give them some money and help them, And actually the festival gave the Fringe some money just to put an advertisement in the paper that was on, and this is what you could see that day. But he said, look, you've organised these other groups of theatres into an association of Community Theatres Act, Association of Community Theatres. I want you to organise the Fringe, because, it's growing. And so I organised the Fringe. And it was quite an effort, of course, get the people together, making it an organisation, and doing all the financial, setting the philosophy, saying the philosophy is that it's an open platform for the arts. There's no
It's not
artistic
curated,
director.
yes.
That's the festival.
But for the local talent,
For
mostly for the local.
Mostly like that, because now it's international.
Yes.
But I was hoping, and it did become the national showcase for Australian works, for new talent and new works. It's become that.
Yes.
And that's why young artists come here, or other artists, or older artists trying out some new stuff. They come here, try it out, and now they go around the world with
Yes.
it.
And they're using this as the platform. to
Absolutely,
springboard.
yes.
And sadly, in a way, the local people doing what they did originally aren't so much doing that anymore, which is why I've instigated my own festival called the Back to Back Short Show Festival this year. And for exactly those same reasons that you started that, to give local people an opportunity. So Frank, from that point, how long were you involved in that? And did you have a big staff of people to help you? Or did it start really small? And
Malcolm, the first year I was like, apart from lecturing full time and had my own company, which was in the Fringe as well, I was answering the phone. And the first year we had as an organisation, I had about 20 volunteers in the costume room amongst the props of the costumes, answering the phone, organising the Fringe. And eventually it was very successful when it all was organised. And so we got some money for a part-time administrator. But for 9 years I was the chairman of the Fringe. And I think Dog's Body is Dog's Body
12 months of the year, and had a little
right.
help close to the event.
Yeah.
I know that feeling very well. Frank, stay with us. We have to take a short break, and we'll be back with more with this amazing gentleman in just a moment.
We're back, and we have Frank Ford with us having a chat about the Cabaret Festival, the Fringe, and our festivals that we have here.
Entertainment generally, I suppose.
Yes.
Frank, the next move from doing the Fringe, did you just get exhausted by the whole process because you were so much a one-man band? How did it grow past that point?
Well, that's the wonderful thing. I think I was able to establish a really good structure and the right sort of legal and financial sort of basis for it. And it's kept on growing, and it's wonderful now. I mean, 1,200 shows, and then to organise that, it takes a lot of skill. I think for the Fringe, you've got to have really top-notch people at the top, as we have now with the wonderful director, Heather Crowell, to be able to organise all that, because you have a lot of inexperienced people in the Fringe. It's their first time, and they need a lot of help. And that's what the Fringe does. It's a festival that supports the artists, independent artists, you know.
But Frank, I guess as you go through life, these opportunities pop up. So clearly another opportunity presented itself to you.
Well, it was interesting. In the 90s, the comedians started to come and overwhelm the Fringe. All of a sudden we had a horde of comedians coming here. And what it was, the promoters of the comedians discovered that they could play Adelaide on the way to the Melbourne Comedy Festival.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, this wonderful showcase of new talent and new work was being swamped by the comedians. And they're wonderful comedians, it's great, but it was becoming a comedy festival. So I thought, my goodness, it's terrible. If I could only find something to get the comedians out and put them somewhere else.
The two.
And so I thought, well, Cabaret, and I'd been involved with Cabaret or university reviews and things like that. And I thought, well, that's always had comedians in them. Perhaps if I started a Cabaret festival. The more I researched the Cabaret, I thought, this is fantastic. No one's doing a cabaret festival. No one's done that. And this is because Australia, right from the 19th century, has a great tradition of musical performers. Haven't Malcolm? It's true that we've had wonderful performers in musical theatre. And I said, you know, we should have a cabaret festival. So I wrote it all up and I researched it and made a proposal. Went around to the city council, all the councillors. They weren't the least bit interested, didn't understand it at all. I went to several politicians. No, didn't understand it at all. And then I...
But
said,
you'd think they were, sorry for interrupting you, but you would think that they would understand the fact that we had the other festivals and that they would actually see the need for what you were trying to do.
Yes, they could see Well, they didn't understand what cabaret was, which was the problem we had when we started it, actually. Well, what is cabaret? Is it the football guys getting dressed up in tutus at the end of the year? And
Was what I used to do when I was a young singer. It was a band in a hotel with people pushing each other around drunkenly until midnight after they'd eaten dinner. Because when you look at the actual definition for cabaret, it's about having food and drinks. It's about seeing things that could be politically inclined, or music, or comedy.
yeah, telling
And
stories.
it's a defined. It's actually a defined word, so it's not hard to hang your hat on that,
Yes,
really.
but it's hard for people to understand because of our background, I think.
Yes, yeah.
And also,
Well,
I
the
think,
cringe was uncringing by the unravelling, I suppose.
and of course, that same you went along to a cabaret show if you could find if ever was one, and usually it was a set menu. The food was terrible. You paid an awful price
And
for
hang
the
on,
food.
be careful what you say, because I used to work in some of those. We both did.
Yes, we
she
did.
worked at
Oh,
the
they're on
Moulin
Rouge
Rouge.
We
ago.
had nothing to do with the food.
Yeah, she worked at the Moulin Rouge, so that's the
Ah,
Yes.
been to the Moulins. Oh,
Yes,
yes, of
yes,
course, yes. But anyhow, it was, that was the package, you know. And that's one of the things I said, if you go to the Cabaret Festival, you'll see that you can get definitely drink in all
Yes.
the theatres. Not so much food, you get some food there, but you've got restaurants outside, which
Oh,
I think
and
that's
nibbly
very
places
good.
around
So you
as
can
well
have a
now.
big dinner or a small dinner, you can have what you want.
Yes.
Now separate, I think that's been one of the things that's made a success. You don't have to have that dinner.
No,
No.
but Frank, I think the other thing that's good about it too is the shows are relatively short, most
Yes.
of them.
Yeah.
So you can really go and see a couple of shows
That's
a night.
right, yeah.
And by doing that, you have that experience there and a completely different experience in another hour and a half's time. And that, I think, makes a great night out for, you know.
And you socialise in between. You're going to have a drink with
Absolutely.
your friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know, the purpose of entertainment is really to take people's workaday minds away and just flood you with something that isn't what you've been thinking about before. And it's a perfect entertainment. So you brought in a couple of things. This was this year's Fringe, wasn't it?
Yeah, Fringe Festival.
And when you flick through this, it's just the most astonishing amount of shows. I've just mostly for the people interstate who don't know. When you start looking, every page is full of more and more and more, and it's that thick. This
So
book.
each venue, sometimes they'd have three, one after the
Yes,
other,
on the
of
same
the
night.
different
3 shows a
performers.
night, yes, and it could be
Yes.
a dance, it could be Shakespeare, it could be cabaret.
I'll get a chunk. To be
Stop.
or not.
Have enough.
So this was the program this year, and the Cabaret Fringe is virtually over now. So Cabaret Festival, I mean, is virtually over. Has the Cabaret Fringe taken off in the same way that the Fringe Festival took off from the Adelaide Festival?
Yes. Didn't actually, because I wrote it into my proposal. When I wrote the proposal for the Cabaret Festival, I said it should have a fringe.
Yes.
And the first year, in 2001, we had the Cabaret Festival, we had a fringe. We had 22 shows in Hindley Street, and they were very successful. Unfortunately, at that time, the festival centre who was running that Cabaret Festival said we really can't do a curated festival and an uncurated festival.
In the same venue.
And no, not
No,
the same
at the same
venue,
time.
at the same time,
Yeah, okay.
which it is difficult. They are different kettle of fish. And so, unfortunately, they dropped the fringe part, which I think is a great shame. And it wasn't until 10 years later the Fringe, Cabaret Fringe started, and they have 50 shows in the Cabaret Fringe. Again, young artists starting out
Yes.
mainly, and wonderful, wonderful shows.
I think being so closely associated with those things because I've got a venue.
Yes.
I think the hard part now for the young emerging artists is finding their place now, and finding, because the world has gone a particular way. Because of we talked on the program about things like Facebook and YouTube, and people looking at those things and thinking, "Oh, I can do that." But in a lot of cases, they're not getting the people in, as you did, to direct the shows or to make the shows come together to say, we sort of understand what an audience is going to want to see. So sometimes you've just got to mould it a bit to make it right for the marketplace. Do you still get involved in those things? Because I know you've done a lot
Yes, sometimes I'll be asked by an artist to come and advise them. And of course, there are definite skills, as you know, in cabaret, I think. And it's very difficult because I think the unique part about cabaret is the performer recognises the presence of the audience. It's not a blank wall. They're not just telling anyone.
No.
They've got to be able to work their audience, but also keep that distance as well. And that's that thing, you get a wonderful sense of live theatre. You feel you're part of the show in a cabaret.
Because you share, as the performer, you're sharing
Yes,
with
exactly.
the audience. And the audience is sharing back with you, which stimulates that whole...
And that's the wonderful thing. I think that's why it has become so popular. You said because television is not, you can't, or film, as great as that can be, you can't have any effect on that. You're not part of it all. You're very passive.
Well, it's interesting. When you get a big laugh for a funny line, often another one will come along, you know, and it's because the audience have given you that response. I've got one of the T-shirts here from the Fringe in what were you doing in 1994, Frank? This was a really famous...
yes, I love that one, the big mouth and tongue. I mean, I think that's, again, a good symbol of the...
It's lovely.
Yeah.
Let it all out, let it happen. Anything goes.
I suppose, yes, well, I guess there's a lot of things you could read into that, but that's fantastic. So, Mr. Frank Ford, what's the future for you? What else are you going to start?
Or have you had enough?
Oh, no, I'm still involved. I'm on the board of the Adelaide Festival as the Friends rep, which is wonderful. We had a wonderful festival the last 2 years. We've got 2 terrific artistic directors, and you know, it is without doubt the best festival in Australia, best high arts festival, best international festival, and it's got a great reputation around the world. So I think, you know, our festivals in Adelaide are wonderful, really, and we're the perfect place for them.
It's
you know,
just wonderful.
you can walk from place to place.
Yes,
Actually,
absolutely.
that's a very valid point. You can, but they've also spread now out into the satellite cities, if you like, around.
It's lovely.
South
I think that's
Australia.
wonderful. Like Salisbury counts and places like Whyalla.
And Whyalla,
the Fringe goes to Whyalla.
And down in Mount Gambier, there's
and it's just
things
wonderful.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's really saying to people that, you know, it's been, I guess it's been well known for many years that having a strong arts background within a community takes people away from the worries of life. It just gives you that, I call it taking the top off your head. It just gives you that release. We all need more of it, and we'll be back to talk about more of it in just a moment.
Frank, I was trying to think of what else we need to cover here, because we've talked so much about your life and where you started from, but where do you think it'll go for you from now?
Well, I hope I'll always be involved in the arts, and I enjoy it so much. And certainly living here, and I'm so glad I came back to Australia. I've got many friends who didn't come back, and they've been quite successful in their careers, but you feel like an expatriate. And we visit them, and I can feel that, you know, they haven't been involved in their own country.
Yeah.
No, because you've been such a major influence on these things, and that's such an important thing. As you were saying before, though, Adelaide in itself is a small city. So if the festivals are city-centric in themselves, clearly you don't have a long way to walk. And in our next Ad Time episode, we're talking with Martin Hamilton-Smith, who is actually in many ways responsible for seeding the concept of, you could say, developing the River Torrens area, where the festival theatre are, where the football stadium is, and a lot more to continue down that path. It says that if you're coming to Adelaide during these times, particularly with the Fringe, you've also got the car race on, Wymaid on.
Wymaid.
And
Writers' Week.
Writers' Week, and there's one more thing on at the same time. And it's just, well, the Adelaide Festival of Arts, of course, at the same time. And it's just fascinating that the whole town goes crazy for that period of time. Been lovely to meet you, Frank, and to have you talking with us. Thank you so much for coming in. Good luck for your future yourself.
Thank you.
Do
Yes.
something brilliant next. Janice, what are you planning?
What am I planning?
Yes.
I don't know. I might have to revive my cabaret show.
You well may.
Frank, I might
Why
need your
not?
help.
We'll see you very soon. Keep yourself nice till next time.